Have you ever stopped to think about a civilization that, well, didn't just exist, but actually forged the foundations of our modern world?
Hmm.
Influencing our laws, our language, architecture, even how societies are structured. Everyone
Hmm.
knows Rome, of course. But the real depth, the sheer transformative power of this empire, it might genuinely surprise you.
It really might. And what's so
Hmm.
striking is that Rome's path wasn't straightforward at all. It was this incredible 1,200-year saga, from just a small settlement, really, to this colossal empire. And then its legacy just kept going in different ways for another 1,000 years.
And that's exactly our mission for this deep dive. We want to take you right through that epic journey from its, mythical origins by the Tiber River, through all the dramatic changes, and finally, the huge lasting impact it left.
Yeah, and our sources, they cover, well, everything. Political systems, the military conquest, but also daily life, culture, and something really fascinating, the rise of a completely new religion right inside its borders.
You'll get the story of how it went from a kingdom to a republic, then this massive empire. We'll dig into the surprising bits about its military strength, its
And the
resilience.
internal conflicts, too, stuff that nearly tore it apart. Then that period of peace under emperors like Augustus and the fall, which, as you'll find out, wasn't quite the sudden end people imagine.
Right, more like a transformation leading to this continuation of Roman influence, especially in the East.
Exactly. So where should we begin?
Let's start right at the beginning. The traditional founding, 753 BC, just this small Italic settlement near the Tiber. And early Rome, it was a kingdom, ruled by 7 kings, apparently.
And the last three, interestingly, were Etruscans from the Tarquini clan.
So what was the big moment? What flipped the script from kingdom to something else?
That would be 509 BC, one of the most pivotal shifts, the birth of the Roman Republic.
Right after they kicked out the last king, Tarquin the Proud.
Precisely. He was seen as tyrannical, abusing his power. So they set up this radically new system. You had annually elected magistrates, different assembly.
And the consuls, right. 2 of them.
Yes, 2 consuls sharing executive power, military command, and they worked alongside the Senate, whose influence, well, it just grew and grew as the Republic went on.
And this new republic, it had a constitution, didn't it? With like checks and balances, separation of powers, pretty advanced stuff for the time.
It really was. But if we look at early Roman society, your point earlier, it wasn't a perfect democracy by any stretch.
Yeah, it sounds like who you were, your class, really mattered for having a voice.
It mattered hugely. The voting system was heavily weighted, wealthier classes, much more influence, poorer classes, often they couldn't even get their votes counted effectively. But Roman law itself laid down some foundational principles that honestly still echo today. You've got the Law of the 12 Tables, way back in 449 BC.
Okay.
And then much, much later, Justinian's codes, around 530 AD. These became the bedrock, really, for a lot of European legal systems.
That's fascinating how they built this legal framework for such a diverse, growing state.
Absolutely. And they developed these 3 main categories. You had Jesus Civil, that was law for Roman citizens.
Right.
Then Jesus Gentium, which was quite groundbreaking. It was law for foreigners and for dealings between foreigners and citizens.
Okay, that's interesting. Handling interactions.
And finally, Jusus Natural, natural law. Ideas about justice common to everyone, a kind of philosophical underpinning.
And within the family, that pater familias figure sounds pretty powerful.
Oh, immensely powerful. This wasn't just symbolic. He controlled property, marriages, and in the early days, even had life and death power over his dependents, a fundamental difference from how we see family today.
Wow. And women's roles.
Limited, certainly. They couldn't vote, couldn't hold political office, but their rights did expand over time. They gained more freedom from that absolute paterfamilias control, could own property eventually. So progress, but slow.
Okay, so we have the legal and social basics. Let's pivot to what many people think of first with Rome. Expansion, that relentless military machine.
Yes.
They had this idea, expanding defense, always claiming self-defense, but somehow they just kept getting bigger. Through treaties, through force. What's the key insight there?
Well, the key thing is, it wasn't some grand strategy meeting where they planned world domination. It was more like a set of ingrained priorities.
Wow.
Each generation of leaders kind of inherited this mindset,
So it just kept rolling.
pretty much.
Mm-hmm.
And conquering Italy itself, that took centuries. Really slow, methodical work. Take the city of Veii, nearly 100 years to conquer that one city.
A century. Wow.
And remember, the Gauls actually sacked Rome itself in 390 BC. A huge blow. But Rome recovered. They gradually took control of Italy using various tactics, building colonies, granting citizenship selectively, forming alliances.
Alliances that required military support from the Allies, right?
Crucially, yes, that tied people to Rome's military endeavors.
So how did this methodical approach lead to such, well, overwhelming military strength?
Manpower and resilience. The Greek historian Polybius, writing around 225 BC, claimed Rome could field over 700,000 soldiers.
700,000.
It's a staggering number.
Ah.
Rival powers in the Mediterranean just couldn't match that depth. It meant they could take hits, absorb losses that would cripple anyone else.
Like with Pyrrhus, the Pyrrhic victory.
Exactly. The war against King Pyrrhus of Epirus. He won battles, yes, but at such a cost. Hence the term. Rome, meanwhile, just kept replacing its soldiers. Pyrrhus couldn't sustain his campaign against that kind of human resource.
And then the big one, the Punic Wars against Carthage. 3 massive conflicts.
Defining moments for Rome's dominance, absolutely. And the First Punic War that forced Rome, traditionally a land power, to suddenly become a major naval power, a huge adaptation.
Right, and the Second Punic War, Hannibal.
Ah, Hannibal, a truly brilliant general. His campaign in Italy lasted 16 years. Using guerrilla tactics, ambushes, Rome suffered its absolute worst defeat at Cannae, lost 16 legions.
16 legions. Hannibal must have thought that was it. Game over.
He probably did.
Yeah.
Hoped it would force them to surrender.
But Rome's response was basically, okay, tough loss, see ya next year. It's just that sheer refusal to quit.
It embodies their mindset perfectly. Relentless commitment. And then you get Scipio Africanus.
The man who finally beat Hannibal.
Yes, and he did it by being quintessentially Roman, adapting. He studied Hannibal's methods, realized the importance of cavalry, specifically Numidian cavalry.
So he found a way to get his own.
Exactly.
Yeah.
He leveraged a civil war in Numidia to gain cavalry support, then took the fight directly to Carthage's home turf. Eventually wore them down, leading to Carthage being utterly destroyed in 146 BC. That don't mess with us attitude was fierce.
And the Roman army itself wasn't static, was it? It kept changing. From those flexible man-ables early on.
Right. Small units of 120 or 60 men. Very adaptable.
To the bigger legions we often picture, 4,000, 5,000 men.
Yes, and that capacity to constantly reorganize its military was a huge part of Rome's longevity. Later, during the Principate, you get units like the Cohortes Equitati,
Or
kind of mixed units, cavalry and legionaries together, more flexible organizationally. And then, much later, mid-3rd century AD, under Emperor Gallienus, a major shakeup.
during that crisis period.
Yes, he created mobile field armies, the comitatenses and border troops, the limitani. They also used allied tribes, foederati more formally.
Why the change then?
It allowed for faster, more adaptable responses. Threats were coming from multiple directions. They needed forces that could move quickly, not just sit on the borders, a vital evolution from the older, more static legions.
Okay, this feels like a good point to transition. All that external expansion and violence. Eventually, it seems like it turned inward. The late Republic sounds like a really chaotic, violent time.
It truly was. After the Punic Wars, you see this huge increase in tension between the rich and the poor in Rome. The wealth from conquest wasn't shared evenly.
And figures like the Gracchi brothers tried to address that. Land reform, free food.
They did. But the reaction from the elite, particularly senators, was unprecedented violence. They literally had the Gracchi brothers killed. One source even says thousands of Gaius Gracchus's supporters had their bodies dumped in the Tiber.
That's brutal. Not just political disagreement anymore.
Not at all. And then you get Lucius Cornelius Sulla. He marched his own army on Rome twice, instituted a reign of terror, posted proscription lists, basically hit lists with thousands of names, political enemies, rivals. Maybe a third of the entire Senate wiped out.
Marching on Rome with your own army, the Republic's norms were just collapsing.
Completely breaking down. Rule of law was secondary to power and military might.
It's amazing Rome survived this, and yet emerging from this chaos comes maybe the most famous Roman of all, Julius Caesar.
What guy is Julius Caesar? From a very prestigious family, the Julii, who claimed descent from gods and heroes.
Right, Aeneas and Venus. But he had this personal ambition too, didn't he? His father hadn't quite reached the top job, consul.
That definitely fueled him. And he was incredibly shrewd politically. He saw the Republic was fractured and knew how to exploit it.
Forming the first triumvirate.
Exactly. An informal deal, really, with Crassus, the richest man in Rome, and Pompey, the most celebrated general at the time. It wasn't official, but it let them effectively control the state by passing the Senate. Shows you how weak the traditional system had become.
And Caesar used that power base to launch his Gallic Wars.
58 to 52 BC. Hugely successful campaigns. and he wrote his commentaries about them.
Which weren't just history books, right? More like PR.
Absolutely. Brilliant political spin, keeping his name and achievements front and center back in Rome.
Yeah.
He did amazing things there. The bridge across the Rhine, expeditions to Britain.
Which the Romans saw as this mysterious far-off land.
Totally. An island of mystery, a land of wonder. And his final victory over Vercingetorix at Alesia cemented his military genius in the public eye.
But that very alliance, the triumvirate, fell apart. The trust between Caesar and Pompey just evaporated.
It did, leading to that incredibly dramatic moment in 49 BC, Caesar crossing the Rubicon River with his army.
Alea iacta est. The die is cast, basically declaring civil war.
Precisely. He crushed Pompey decisively at Pharsalus. Pompey fled to Egypt.
And got killed there. Caesar followed, met Cleopatra.
Had an affair, fathered Caesarion, then returned to Rome triumphant.
And that's when he was named Dictator Perpetuo, dictator for life.
Yes, and many historians point to that as the fatal mistake. It flew in the face of everything the Republic stood for, even in its weakened state.
Leading directly to his assassination, Ides of March, 44 BC.
Stabbed to death in the Senate. But killing Caesar didn't restore the Republic, did it?
Not at all. It just created a massive power vacuum.
Which was quickly filled by the second triumvirate, this one was official, Octavian, Mark Antony, and Lepidus.
Octavian being Caesar's young heir.
Yes. Officially, they were the triumvirate for the reconstitution of the Republic. Unofficially. They carved up the Roman world between them. Lepidus got sidelined pretty quickly, though.
Leaving Octavian versus Antony. An epic rivalry.
Truly. And Octavian was brilliant with propaganda. He painted Antony as being under the spell of Cleopatra, this scary foreigner.
Accused him of wanting to be buried in Egypt, making him seem un-Roman.
Exactly. It all came to a head at the Battle of Actium in 31 BC. A naval battle.
Where Antony's fleet just failed.
Yeah. Reports suggest issues like getting stuck in dead water, patches of highly saline, water-slowing ships, or just bad luck with the winds. Whatever the cause, his fleet was destroyed.
And Octavian didn't hesitate, annexed Egypt.
And ruthlessly executed Caesarion, Caesar's son with Cleopatra, and also Antony's eldest son. No potential rivals left standing. He was now the sole ruler.
Which brings us to the Golden Age. Octavian becomes Augustus, establishes the Pax Romana, the Roman peace.
And he did it so cleverly. He never called himself dictator or king. He established the Principate. Technically, he was just the first citizen.
But he held all the real power. How did he bring stability after decades of civil war?
Through smart reforms and consolidating power carefully. He created Rome's first professional police and fire services, crucial for a city that now had over 1 million people.
Bringing order.
Yes. He expanded the Praetorian Guard, making them loyal directly to him, and he sorted out the finances with tax reforms, creating stable revenue for the empire, not just relying on plunder.
And he divided the provinces, didn't he? Some under the Senate, some directly under him.
Imperial provinces, yes, usually the ones with armies stationed there. It was this whole package organization, security, stable finance that allowed him to secure the borders and usher in that unprecedented peace.
The Pax Romana. Decades of relative stability and prosperity for, what, 50 to 70 million people?
Roughly, yeah. An enormous number for the time. His goal was secure borders, Sahara, Atlantic, North Sea, the Rhine and Danube rivers, and he largely achieved it.
And it wasn't just peace, it was a cultural flourishing too, right? The golden age of Latin literature.
Absolutely. Virgil, Horace, Ovid, producing works that are still read today. It was a remarkable era, shaped by Augustus's vision and careful statecraft.
And even after him, the system seemed to hold, despite some colorful emperors in the Julio-Claudian line.
That's a good way to put it.
Yeah.
You had Tiberius, seen as aloof. Caligula, often remembered as a mad tyrant, though some sources might be biased. Claudius.
Often depicted as weak, maybe because of a limp, but actually quite effective.
Surprisingly so, yes. Reformed laws, big building projects, and then Nero, borderline lunatic territory, often blamed for the Great Fire of Rome.
But the key insight, maybe, is that the institutions Augustus built were strong enough to weather even these emperors.
I think so. It shows the robustness of the system he created. It wasn't solely dependent on the emperor being brilliant or stable.
Then Vespasian comes along, starts the Flavian dynasty, builds the Colosseum.
Right, partly as a way to legitimize his rule after the chaos following Nero. Then Trajan, more expansion, lots of public building, Trajan's Forum, Trajan's Column.
And finally, Antoninus Pius. His reign sounds almost boringly peaceful.
Described as the most peaceful in the entire history of the Roman Empire. Left the empire in very fine shape. A high point, perhaps?
But golden ages don't last forever. We then hit the crisis of the 3rd century, 235 to 285 AD. Sounds like absolute chaos.
He was catastrophic. Extreme political instability. Think 26 emperors in just 49 years.
26, wow.
Constant civil war, assassinations, add severe economic problems, coinage debased, hyperinflation, and devastating plagues like the Plague of Cyprian.
And parts of the empire actually broke away.
Yes, the Palmyrene Empire in the east, the Gallic Empire in the west, especially after Emperor Valerian was captured by the Persians, a massive humiliation.
But again, that Roman resilience, they learned from this chaos, didn't they?
They had to. Under Diocletian, his reforms were like applying flex tape to hold the empire together.
Okay, how?
He established the Tetrarchy, rule by 4. 2 senior emperors, Augusti, 2 junior ones, Caesars, each governing a different region, trying to make administration and defense manageable.
Makes sense.
He also pushed through major tax reforms to stabilize the economy. But he's also known for the last major imperial persecution of Christians. Very controversial.
And he did something unique for an emperor, right? He resigned.
He did. In 305 AD, first Roman emperor ever to voluntarily step down, apparently trying to emulate the old Republican hero Cincinnatus. Quite remarkable.
This brings us neatly to Christianity. Its growth within the empire is just incredible. From maybe less than 1,000 followers around 40 AD.
To becoming the majority religion of the whole empire by 400 AD. It's an astonishing trajectory.
And modern historians suggest it wasn't just Constantine suddenly adopting it that made the difference. It seems Christianity had reached a kind of critical mass much earlier. What drove that?
Well, several internal factors seem key. First, its inclusivity. It was open to everyone, men, women, rich, poor, slave, free. Baptism was free. This contrasted sharply with many pagan cults that were exclusive or costly.
So accessible.
Very. And second, its emphasis on unconditional altruism, especially during those terrible plagues, the Antonine Plague, the Plague of Cyprian. Christians actively cared for the sick, even non-Christians, when many others fled.
That must have made a huge impression.
Profoundly attractive. It also led to things like monastic healthcare, the first Christian hospitals, a kind of social safety net that didn't really exist otherwise.
And the ideas themselves, were they radically different?
Some were very novel, belief in a bodily resurrection, for instance, and Christianity claimed a historical basis, Jesus' life, death, resurrection, supported by prophecies, eyewitness accounts. Paganism often lacked that concrete historical narrative.
Interesting. What about social issues like slavery?
It was nuanced. Christianity used slavery as a metaphor for sin, but didn't call for abolition. However, it did influence practices, discouraging the common practice of abandoning unwanted infants, promoting chastity among slaves. Small shifts in societal norms.
And then Constantine does come along. How did imperial favor change things?
Well, Constantine shifted the monetary system towards gold, which had big economic effects. Later emperors, like Theodosius I, issued laws often seen as banning paganism. Though the focus might have been more on private, domestic sacrifices, which were dying out anyway, rather than a total ban on public temples immediately. Still a major shift.
And this period also sees the East and West drifting apart, especially on who had authority over the church.
Definitely. In the West, as the Senate's power faded, the Pope in Rome started gaining more civic and political influence. In the East, the emperor generally kept tighter control over the church. A growing divergence.
Which leads us towards the traditional date for the fall of the Western Empire, 476 AD. But you mentioned earlier it's not really a single event.
Not at all. It's much better understood as a process, a gradual decline and transformation. A key factor was the collapse of the professional field army in the West. After strong generals like Stilicho died, the central government lost control.
Leading to things like the Visigoths sacking Rome in 410.
Exactly, a huge psychological blow, even if the city recovered. But more practically, the empire started losing vast territories. North Africa, southern Gaul, Spain, Britain, slipping away to various groups like Vandals, Goths, Suebi.
So by 476, when Odoacer kicks out the last Western emperor, Romulus Augustulus.
It's kind of the end point of this long process of disintegration in the West. Though some historians argue the real last emperor was Julius Nepos, who died a few years later.
But the crucial point is Roman culture didn't just vanish.
Absolutely not. Roman law, administration, language, Christianity, these things continued, evolved, even without a Western Roman emperor. It was a political fragmentation, not a cultural wipeout.
And meanwhile, in the East, the lights stayed on.
They absolutely did. The Eastern Roman Empire, which we now often call Byzantium, continued for almost another 1,000 years. carrying that Roman legacy forward.
With major figures like Justinian.
Justinian I, yeah. Famous for trying to reconquer Italy, the Gothic War, which was incredibly destructive, actually. Also for rebuilding the Hagia Sophia Church in Constantinople after riots.
Ah, the Nika riots, sparked by chariot racing fans.
That's the one. Incredible story. The city burned for days. But Justinian survived, rebuilt, and crucially, he codified Roman law into the Corpus Juris Civilis.
Which is still influential today, right?
Hugely. The basis for many modern European legal codes. Shows the enduring power of Roman legal thought. Constantinople itself remained this vibrant, cosmopolitan hub for centuries.
And the Byzantine military kept innovating too, the Thema system, heavy cavalry.
Yes, the Thema system linked land grants to military service, a different model. They used cataphractoi heavily armored cavalry, and the famous Varangian Guard, elite mercenaries mostly from Scandinavia and Rusies, a formidable force for a long time.
But even Byzantium eventually faced its end.
It did. Internal struggles, external pressures. Emperor Alexios the Komnenos famously asked Western Europe for help against the Turks.
Which led to the Crusades.
Indirectly, yes. And ironically, one crusade, the fourth, ended up sacking Constantinople itself in 1204, a devastating blow dealt by fellow Christians.
Wow.
The empire recovered partially, but never fully regained its strength. Finally, in 1453, Constantinople fell to the Ottoman Sultan, Mehmed the Conqueror. That marked the end of the last direct continuation of the Roman state, over 2,000 years after its legendary founding.
What an incredible sweep of history, just the sheer scale of it. We've gone from a tiny settlement to a republic, an empire spanning continents.
And its constant reinvention. Think about it, learning from the Pyrrhic Wars, the devastating Punic Wars, those brutal civil wars in the late Republic, the crisis of the 3rd century. Each time, it adapted, changed its structure, found a way to keep going.
Kingdom, republic, empire, influencing the papacy, the Byzantine state. That adaptability is just astounding.
And its legacy, as we said at the start, it's not just in history books. It's in our languages, Latin spawning the Romance languages. It's in our legal systems, thanks to things like Justinian's Code.
Architecture too, aqueducts, roads, concrete, even literature. That idea of an Augustan age as a peak of literary achievement pops up in other cultures too.
Exactly. Its influence is woven into the fabric of Western civilization and beyond.
So thinking about all this immense journey, this unparalleled ability to adapt and survive for so long, what does it make you think about when we talk about civilizational collapse today?
That's a great question to ponder.
Given Rome's story, how much of its fall was really a definitive end, and how much was just transformation, adaptation into new forms, the Church, Byzantium, the successor kingdoms that carried its legacy forward? It makes you wonder, doesn't it? What seemingly insurmountable challenges are forcing transformations, maybe less obvious ones, in our own world right now?